Imagine the crushing blow when the judge says, you know what, DNA doesn't matter.
A Georgia man in prison for life, even though he has evidence that can't prove his innocence. A DNA test pointed to another suspect years ago, but Georgia's court says it's not enough.
Channel 2's investigative reporter Jody Fleischer is here with why this man cannot get a new trial despite overwhelming evidence.
Jovita, like most of us, Devanya Inman thought that DNA evidence was a sure thing and he'd at least get a new trial. But Georgia's court system doesn't guarantee that. Even the legal experts working to free him were astounded. When I met him in prison, I asked if he still had hope, and he didn't know how to answer.
I'd be asking God, like, what is the purpose, for reason of me being here?
Devanya Inman has had nearly 18 years to question his faith and his belief in the justice system.
It's like they're saying, who cares if we're wrong or right? Okay, yeah, he ain't the one who committed the crime, but we're going to keep him in prison anyway.
He'd only lived in Georgia 2 months when a Taco Bell manager was gunned down in an Adel parking lot. Arrested 2 days later, Inman always maintained his innocence.
There's not a shred of physical evidence, forensic evidence, no fingerprints, no blood, no DNA that ever ties him to this crime.
A jury convicted him based on witnesses, his girlfriend's sister, a jailhouse snitch, and a Taco Bell employee, all of whom later said they lied.
Basically, I made it up. Yeah, just to get him out the picture.
Marquetta Thomas changed her story before trial, but it still haunts her.
I'll do anything to help free this man.
The only witness who hasn't recanted is a newspaper carrier that ID'd Inman after watching the victim's car race by.
The guy who was there next to her not only said that it didn't happen, he says that she made it up to get the reward money.
At trial, the judge rejected 3 defense witnesses who would have pointed to someone else, a Taco Bell employee known for violence. 2 of Hercules Brown's friends said he confessed. A co-worker said Brown even asked her to help with the crime.
They were all saying the same thing, but Georgia says if all you have is that, it's not going to get admitted in court.
10 years later, they'd have much more. The Georgia Innocence Project got the GBI to test the inside of this homemade mask found inside the victim's car. The DNA belonged to Hercules Brown.
I thought, we've got it. Devanya's coming home.
But when they petitioned the judge for a new trial, he said no. Then, with no explanation, Georgia's Supreme Court refused to hear the case.
Once you are convicted of a crime, the facts of the case don't really matter that much anymore.
Everything we hear about on the news of DNA should be your get out of jail free card, and the reality is that it's not.
Georgia state law professor Jesse Sino has spent hundreds of hours researching Inman's case and getting to know him.
There is a person behind this story who is sitting in prison, possibly for the rest of his life, and he's innocent. And that's scary.
Nobody wants to accept a mistake, but I have to live with it.
At trial, prosecutors insisted the evidence pointed to Inman. Now they say he and Brown must have worked together, though Inman says the two had never even met until a chance encounter on a jail bus.
He's like, man, I hope you go home.
That's all Devanya Inman wants.
Take care.
With the little faith he has left.
I have faith, Jesse.
We tried to find Hercules Brown. Turns out he's serving life in prison for murdering 2 convenience store workers shortly after this crime. He did not respond to our request for an interview. Now, you can watch what happened when the GBI questioned Brown about the mask on our website at WSBTV.com. We've also posted more about those witnesses who changed their stories.
So, what happens to the man now?
Well, if nothing changes, he's stuck. He will spend the rest of his life in prison. There is a legal team working on what's basically a Hail Mary request for a hearing in federal court, but those are almost never granted.
Incredible.
It's beyond frustrating. It's a tragedy.
This former legislator says Georgia's justice system is failing and innocent people are paying the ultimate price. She wrote the law to get old evidence tested for DNA years after someone had been convicted in hopes of finding the truth. But investigative reporter Jody Fleischer with us live from the state capitol with why that law is still falling short.
Justin, that former legislator told me she knew this was going to be a problem back when she wrote Georgia's DNA law, and she tried to fix it, but she says prosecutors fought it. Now, the law helps defendants get the DNA to show they're innocent, but can still deny them the new trial to prove it.
I think about Sonny all the time. He's missed a lot of his life.
Keisha Pitts wasn't particularly close with Sonny Baradia when he went to prison 15 years ago, but she is one of the most important people in his life today.
I told the truth as I knew it to be.
Keisha was an alibi witness who said Baradia could not possibly have broken into this Savannah apartment or assaulted the young woman who walked in on the burglary. Keisha saw Baradia here in Atlanta.
So I'm like 100% sure if it happened that weekend that he couldn't have done it.
Baradia had fixed her van that Saturday morning.
I'm not Harry.
He took her kids to see a Harry Potter movie at the Starlight Theater. Sunday morning, he was back to borrow her husband's tools, returning them by sundown. Driving to Savannah and back in between would have been impossible.
There's an innocent man sitting in prison for a crime he didn't commit.
No physical evidence tied Baradia to the crime. The jury convicted him based on the victim's ID, even though she was blindfolded most of the time. Sterling Flint also testified the career burglar was caught with the victim's belongings, including these gloves, which she said her attacker had worn.
I am sure that Mr. Flint was trying to think of how he was going to get out from under this crime.
Flint told the jury he was just holding the items for Baradia, whose attorney never thought to test for DNA. When the Georgia Innocence Project did a decade later, the only skin cells inside those gloves matched to Sterling Flint.
It's horrendous. It's astounding.
Steve Cole has researched eyewitness identification for nearly 40 years. He says the victim was highly stressed, identifying someone of another race, and didn't make the ID until 10 days after the crime. Plus, police lost the lineup before trial.
Any one of these factors that we're talking about can significantly decrease the likelihood of an accurate identification.
Of more than 300 inmates later cleared by DNA, 75% had been wrongly identified by eyewitnesses.
It is staggering. By far, the most unreliable kinds of evidence are those of eyewitness identification.
But the courts keep denying Baradia's requests for a new trial.
It's a tragedy.
Stephanie Stuckey-Benfield drafted Georgia's DNA statute and intended for defendants who get DNA that could clear them to also get a new trial.
What's the point of doing testing if you can't get it back in front of the court?
She says prosecutors and victims groups fought a mandate for new trial, so she passed what she could.
It's a breakdown in the system, and I think it's something that should be corrected by the legislative body.
Keisha hopes her friend's case will convince them to listen to the DNA.
How come the same thing that can incriminate you can't clear you?
Georgia's Department of Corrections denied our repeated request to do an interview with Sonny Baradia. They wouldn't let us visit with him. They wouldn't even let him call us on the phone. Now, he is serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. He has one last-ditch hearing coming up later this summer.
Now, Jody, what about the other man, Flint? What's he doing now?
Well, he's out on parole for a string of more recent burglaries, and he's living here in Atlanta. We were able to reach him by phone, and he told us he did not want to make any sort of comment about this case.
All right, Channel 2's Jody Fleischer in downtown.